watching my video this morning, you can see that I've started to do something that I'm going to do for a while, at least every now and then, as a way to let you into the world of KI more, where I'm facilitating myself and showing you what it's like to have these skills. And then I'm going to do that for about a week or so, maybe a little more. Again, as a way to invite you into the more experiential platform that we're creating. If people don't know what KI is, how it works, why would they be interested in going to a platform where we can show you more skill, help you deepen with that? You have to have a sense of what it is we're doing. And I have really kept that close to the chest, excuse me, for a number of reasons. KI opens us up to the unconscious. It brings up somatic stuff, sometimes buried, repressed emotions and trauma. And this is all great because this is how many of us are letting go of long held programs and stories, physical pain, contraction. It's all part of the embodiment process. So for us, it's necessary in order not to bypass. But because it brings that stuff up, the way I want to do that is in an environment where if you're being supported by me and the other facilitators, we're showing you how to do it. We're following up with you. We're there to help you if you get stuck. We're there to help you if you're overwhelmed. You can't really do that on YouTube very well. And if you don't think that this particular style of inquiry can bring stuff up like that, then you haven't done it yet. You haven't done KI yet. Don't want to scare you because this is how, if you can understand how important this is, during the time in which I had, massive chronic pain, the healing of that pain came largely from anger and other repression work. So apparently I wasn't going to be able to heal until I lifted the repression on anger. That's the way it unfolded for me. And when it did, there were times when high levels of anxiety would come rush through, or actual anger and rage. And I saw then the value of being supported and having people around you who know what's going on. I had one person, two people. Dan and my husband Chester understood what was going on for me during the healing process. But for someone, as I envision someone who just doesn't have the same skill level as me or Dan or Chester, because Chester's quite good at this also, don't have that skill level, and then you're listening to these YouTube to the extent that I'm experiential on here, and suddenly you open up a can of worms that you can't seal back, or that. So we feel like it's more conscientious to do this work in a way that's guided and supportive, especially the body contraction, repression, trauma, chronic pain, repression type inquiries. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And these videos that started today, where I'm really showing you how to do it from within, are probably going to go away. The ones that started November 28th, because we're going to launch the new platform fairly soon. So these videos where I demonstrate are going to go away. So you may want to download them or just watch them a few times. But really, they're here again to invite you into the platform, because the idea is that if you watch me do it and then I show you how to do it, you'll begin doing it, and then we can have that relationship with each other. Yes, here's what I want to talk about. Just these are kind of conversations. Some of them happen from like messages on Facebook or text or email, or conversations that I've had with people recently. There's one particular note here that I think is a good one. There's quite a few good topics here, actually. Um, so a few good topics here. One is if you notice how we avoid and how sometimes our spiritual practice encourages avoidance. And once you start to do work like this, where you proactively go into areas, like you don't just sit and wait for life to show you the stuff that you believe, you actually know how to bring it up, the unconscious stuff. Then you start to see how other practices really encourage bypassing. For example, before I developed the inquiries, the way that I dealt with things would be like in the moment of a trigger happening, I can't inquire because the actual conflict is happening right then. So let's say, you're with your spouse or your mom or somebody, a coworker, and you're really upset. But in that moment, there's nothing you can do about it. Just be with it, right? But when it comes to inquiry, people are always asking, how do I do that? Well, it's very difficult to do it while it's happening, unless you have a good degree of awareness in your experience and you can just begin to see things as a conversation is happening or something. But so then normally we're we're not able to do it, in other words, while it's happening. And then we often then go to like the meditation mat, but we don't encourage something to be brought up, for example. We might just wait for it to happen. So what I mean is like a trigger might come up where like, okay, my friend is triggering an old trauma of mine that says I don't trust people, right? So in the moment of that trigger, I can't look at it because he's saying something or doing something that's triggering in the moment. But I'm feeling something, right? I'm upset. Well, I can't look at it right then. So the question is, what do I do with that? If I wait and don't do anything with it, and then I go sit down on the meditation mat or in my room quietly without conjuring that up specifically, then I'm just waiting to see if it comes up, just sitting here. That kind of curious sitting here where you're just exploring the body and what comes up with it. But it just seems like snail spirituality is what it feels like. It feels so slow and so unconscious. It's like instead of that, here's my partner. I'm feeling upset, so I can't inquire, let's say, while he's here. I can't really look at it. Let's say he walks away and then I pull him up. There he is. What deficiency story is he bringing up in me? I can't trust people. Reverse. I can trust him. I can trust everyone. No. And I just let that no be there. Feel that no, but see the no. There's my program. See, I didn't have to wait and go to the meditation mat and hope that it comes up or sit quietly in awareness and explore what is. Because this one's a buried one. This one wasn't obvious until I did the boomerang and I pulled it up and saw, oh, I don't trust people. And then I reversed it. I trust people. And then here comes the program. See the difference between, can you see the difference between that and then just sitting, hoping, praying, right? Act of grace that everything around that will be seen. But these kinds of triggers are unconscious. You see, they might show up as a feeling or a sensation or contraction or some thoughts, but the full gamut of that isn't conscious and may not even become conscious if I go sit on a mat and just rest there. So, in some ways, the practices that we do, if that's your practice, is challenging to say the least because life is bringing up the trigger in real time in that relationship, but we can't look at it. So if our practice is just to rest as awareness, again, we walk away from that. Just resting, now the actual trigger isn't as ripe. And so it may even be falling away, becoming kind of dormant, like repressed, right? More unconscious because it hasn't been processed. Then we go sit on a couch and just maybe see the image of him saying that or see some words of it, but we're not proactively bringing the full program up. So you're lucky if you see it all from just sitting there. And without being able to re-trigger yourself, you can miss things. So if you're just on a mat, but you're not re-triggering yourself, things can go dormant temporarily. It's like, let's say, instead of doing a very thorough inquiry on, I don't trust people, I just do it that kind of that old way where it's like he triggered me, but I don't use the boomerang. So, and I don't use any reverse inquiry, and I just sit here. And so much of it isn't given to me. I don't have the boomerang if I just sit here and I don't ask that question, what deficiency story comes up? Because deficiency stories are largely unconscious. If I just sit here, it might not come up at all. Instead, what might come up are like thoughts about him. Like, so I'm sitting here witnessing these thoughts that aren't really about me, not getting to the root of the matter. See that? And then even if I do somehow catch that it's okay, I don't trust people, if somehow that still shows itself to me, what am I going to do with that? Because it's not just that thought. These programs have a series of thoughts connected to them and utilities that keep it in place. Without conjuring that up, I'm left to only see what my consciousness will show me. So it might just show me the first surface level thoughts, like I don't trust anyone, and then I just rest with that, right? But again, there's a whole set of files connected to it, but I don't see it because I blindly think that it's just this one thought or a few thoughts. Let's say I rest through those without any inquiry. This is just resting, being in awareness, and it goes quiet. It just goes quiet, so the trigger's not on the surface anymore. And it can give a false sense of having seen through something. But without being able to dig deeper and actively pull things up, there's no way of knowing, because if it's quiet, even deceptively quiet, there's nothing I can do if it's not going to come back up, because I'm not proactively doing anything to make it come up. So there's like a false sense of clarity that can come in. And this is how I think body contractions remain for people, is that the surface trigger, the emotion, you could say, on the surface, or the thoughts just on the surface, fall away, giving some experience of presence, but the more deeply rooted thoughts and then the contraction itself remains in place. And around that, again, the emotion and the surface thoughts come to rest. So what's left is like this tightness in stomach or whatever. And let's say that that tightness in stomach has been with you for years. Your spiritual practice right there might be the reason why it remains, because you're just dealing with the surface emotion and you feel better, but there's more there. And without digging with things like KI, you're not going to see it. So it's going to remain as a contraction. Here's where it gets really tricky, because if you just sit with the contraction, let's say the surface trigger is gone, and you have just this tightness in your stomach, but you don't have any inquiry questions. So you're just sitting there now. The trigger's already gone. It feels clear, except for a tight stomach, and you're resting with that, kind of hoping maybe it'll show you something else about this. And maybe it shows you a few other things. But for the most part, the contraction stays there. Why? Because the thoughts connected to it are largely unconscious. There's the thing right there. So this is why sensations, contractions remain for people, is because resting with what is often doesn't get to this unconscious stuff. So then that contraction remains. Why is that important? Because the next time that trigger comes, whatever that was, that contraction's involved. That contraction in the stomach or the heart contains unconscious, like what Eckhart calls pain body. We might say is trauma or repression, stuck energy. And it contains a lot of material, programs about who you are, your identity, your trauma. So then it gets triggered again because the stomach wasn't dealt with fully. So you can see the bypass. Like if you keep getting triggered on something and you get clear in the moment, but the contraction remains and you don't know how to penetrate into that and see the stuff that's there, that contraction then is at the root of all these other triggers, similar triggers coming, bypassing the contraction by just getting to a place of surface clarity where there's still a contraction. That gets bypassed, and that is involved in future triggers. So it seems very avoidant to me now, to recognize that I can't inquire while the trigger is happening if I can't. And if there's no encouragement to look at it proactively with inquiry after, then I'm left to like meditation mat or resting as awareness, waiting for it to come up. Think about that. So, partner brought it up. It's right there. It's alive. It's a living trigger right there. But because I don't look at it, don't have tools to look at it, I just sit here. When it's no longer fully ripe, when it's already starting to settle some, and as it settles, it's kind of going into unconscious, like where you can't detect it. See that? So it seems like snail spirituality to just go somewhere and rest and hope and wait for everything to appear. But because of the nature of repression and unconscious, a lot of it doesn't. Snail spiritual practice. Snail meaning slow, not getting fully to the root of things, bypassing deep contractions in the body, lack of skillfulness to deal with those things creates slow process of unraveling. Somebody mentioned, this is kind of another question. Someone mentioned with KI, once you get kind of deep into it, you see that it's a tool that you can use in so many areas of your life. How then do you keep spiritual practice? How do you balance life and spiritual practice? This is basically the question. How do you balance doing these inquiries in your life and your actual life, which you have to live? And, we used to call this style of inquiry living inquiries because it's lived. And if spiritual practice becomes fused into life completely, lived, like living meditation, living inquiry, then it ceases being a thing apart from life. It ceases being something that you do at the side of life. It becomes integrated fully into your life. So if you look at the video that I just did around the imaginary trigger of Chester not listening to me, the video is called The Capacity to Be Awake. That is the infusing of inquiry into my life. So it's not really waiting to go have a separate spiritual practice hours after the trigger setting for in quietness for 40 minutes. This is a living thing. So if you notice in that video, while the trigger was happening, or shortly thereafter, I was inquiring. So it was infused into living. And when it becomes infused into living, it's really no longer a spiritual practice apart from life. And this is where I think there's a richness here, I'm telling you, because when these inquiries get infused into your life, it's almost like they're a natural extension of being. I don't know how to say that. It's not a practice. It doesn't even feel like an inquiry. It feels like intelligent curiosity about what's here. Intelligent curiosity about what's here. And that intelligent curiosity coming from awareness with these tools is always alive. It's always here. So when things are happening, these tools come up and show you exactly what you're believing. What are the unconscious thoughts that go with it? What's the utility? What am I getting out of believing this? What are the feelings? What do the sensations say? Programs there. You see how it's you infuse it into life and it brings life more to life. I don't know how to say it, but like your interior experience lights up. Whereas before it was unconscious and dark, and you kind of just doubled over in some trigger, the lights come on. As you begin to inquire, you see all these things that you couldn't see that were already operating. So it lights that up in all of your experiences. So every experience, when practice gets infused into your life, every experience in the external, you see it from the internal. You see the thoughts, the feelings that are connected to it. So trigger from Chester, external thing, seeming to happen, meaning from someone else or with someone else, and then an inquiry, the internal programs get eliminated, and I can see then from the internal programs why I'm acting the way I am with Chester. The inside and the outside are one. So this work comes alive for you in the midst of your life, and it ceases being a practice apart from it. And this is when I think people stop, the seeking for enlightenment really dies down. The seeking energy begins to really die down as you infuse this practice into your life, because you start to recognize it's not really about getting anywhere. It's just about this curious intelligence that it wants to see what's actually here instead of living in the dark. And for me, it's as natural as pretty much as natural as breathing now. And when it's at that level, it's not even considered a practice. It's just awakeness with some skill in it. When you start doing this work, I spoke to a gentleman the other day about this. We don't know how much trauma and deficiency stories and shame, fear, repression are running our lives. We don't really know until you start illuminating it all. So what starts to happen is, one thing that starts to happen as you learn how to inquire this way is you start seeing how the deficiency story is running your life, or stories. So the boomerang is a way of like, okay, here's the external relationships like dad, mom, husband, boss. So these people mirror back particular stories, and you'll see that these stories, like there's a few core stories that you'll have, deficiency stories. You'll start to see those as you start boomeranging these relationships. Like, what does this relationship, what deficiency story comes up here? This trigger from my wife, what deficiency story comes up here? When I look at my boss who has that disgruntled look on his face, what deficiency story arises here? You're becoming conscious of how the deficiency story runs your life. And that can be disheartening at first, to be so conscious of that, because you'll see it everywhere. And many people are operating in the dark right now. They're not seeing it, getting tripped up in triggers all the time in relationship, but not lighting up their interior experience to see the correlates, like not even knowing that in the moment that they're pissed at their spouse, that they're believing that they are insignificant, for example, or unheard or something. So just operating in the dark. But then when you're no longer operating in the dark, here come the deficiency stories. And it's like every time you get triggered, then you see it. It's like, there it is, what I believe. It's all illuminated for you. But because deficiency is running everything, it's like it's everywhere. You'll see it everywhere. It was always already everywhere, but now you can see it. And this can be disheartening, and it can feel like too much. And you can see why we hid it from ourselves. Because to see it is somewhat overwhelming at first, or can be. I went through that period when I first developed the boomerang, and back then the unfindable inquiry. My muse was the story that I'm unlovable. So just like many of you, I started using the boomerang before anybody else knew about the tool. I was using it, and it's like everything mirrored that back to some degree. Because there had been an awakening, many of the things were very light, so much so that they were fairly easy to see through. But with close relationships, like mom, dad, husband, ex-husband, that's when the juicier triggers were present, but they were still the same story. So everywhere I went, I noticed or how separation had solidified into my experience, because I kept identifying with I'm unlovable. And now it was showing up everywhere. And yes, it was disheartening at first. It's humbling, to say the least, to see that what you thought was just you living your life ends up being, you realize you're programmed to respond to life in similar ways over and over in different scenarios because of a central program that you believe, or one or two of them. So as I saw that, though, I also saw the opportunity, because before I was able to illuminate that story and how it was operating everywhere, there's nothing I could do. These triggers, I was missing them. Now I didn't miss them. So every time I saw that unlovable story coming up, I went into inquiry, saw the emptiness of it. In all of those relationships, I spent a few months in this. You're probably going to spend a few months in this, but the investment is so worth it because if you go deeply into this and with a radical kind of earnestness, this stuff falls away. It really does. So all that inquiry that I did is so helpful. I saw the emptiness of that self, that story. So it's very rare, if at all, that I ever see that trigger today. Think about how transformative that is. If I'm unlovable was the story running all of my relationships, creating 90%, 80, 90% of my suffering or pain, all that gets lifted. It's well worth the investment, the time investment in taking a deeper and ongoing look at these stories that run our lives. Here's another thing is when we are upset in a relationship and with someone else, let's say someone else has upset us, we're angry. Notice how when we're unconscious of what we're believing in that moment or what we're repressing or what trauma is arising, the tendency is to want to put that pain on the other person. I mean, come on, hello, everybody has done that. And for those of you doing anger repression work, you're probably seeing it even more now. And that wasn't accessible to you. Like if you repressed anger all of your life, you weren't probably putting that on other people. You weren't even showing it. Now it's coming up. And for others who were never repressed, you know what I mean. So getting angry at people, being able to get angry at people has been really helpful for me, having access to that. But actually putting anger on someone sometimes has to happen too. But when I do that, I've noticed where is the free flow of real, intimate, honest communication? How does it happen? It doesn't happen very often. Vulnerable, open communication when two people are angry at each other. If you watch, there's actually a breakdown of real, honest communication in those moments. It tends to be about finger pointing, you're doing this, you're doing that. So there isn't really any understanding or insight happening in those conversations. I mean, it may be very healthy to not hold it in. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying in terms of just being able to resolve an issue. So what I notice is if I'm triggered, I have to be able to express the emotion to the other person. I have to have access to be able to do that. If I'm not, then I'm holding on to that. And by not expressing it, there's some repression of it, like out of fear. So there's a bit of a shutdown. So how does communication opens back up in these triggers when vulnerability appears? But with anger or a strong emotion that we're not sharing vulnerably on, again, can't really resolve things very well. It's amazing though to sit while you're triggered. Let me show you what I do because I'm going to do this before. I'm doing some experiential work for you guys to show you what I mean. I'm going to use another imaginary trigger unless I can think of one here. Oh, yes, I remember one. This will work perfectly. This is a real situation. One day, Chester and I were walking the dogs out, and he used the word mindful. He said, be mindful. Remember to throw the check trash in this bag. Remember, he was trying to get me to remember something. I said, oh, you know what? Mindfulness is really more about attending and just observing, being present instead of remembering. And I said, people in the West have kind of hijacked the word a little bit. And he got really triggered because he heard that as I was attacking him. And it didn't feel like I was, but sometimes I can just be direct. And the way that I said that must have been hurtful to him. He got really, really defensive and started coming at me, which at that point in time, I was already out of anger repression. And I remember we got into a little bit of spat, and I thought how ridiculous this is. I didn't intend this by saying this, but here it was. And he was really coming at me. And I was coming back at him a little while, but then I walked away and I went upstairs. And I sat there and I noticed that I was angry and I was afraid. That's what I noticed. I just sat there with anger and fear. And I recognized that the thing that would open the relationship or the communication back up would be to be vulnerable and to go and say to him, this is what I'm feeling, instead of going back into the mindfulness discussion. Who's right, you know? So I sat there. I just felt the anger and fear, but I noticed that it wasn't fully conscious. It's like if it were all there for me to see, it would have just kind of all fallen away. But in the moment of a trigger, to illuminate it, what I had to do there is I had to say, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. And that what that did is it provoked it to the surface. Yes, I am. I'm pissed that he responded that way. I'm angry because the way he attacks me. So I'm just now conscious of these thoughts. And the anger is with the thoughts. So it's all fully conscious now. I'm not hiding it from myself. Fully acknowledging. Saying again, I'm not angry. Yes, I am still. Seeing everything. And then checking into repression. So I can feel and express this anger to Chester. No, because it'll just create more argument. So shut down. Let that be. Let those words be seen. And I kept with that inquiry. I'm not angry to make it all conscious so I could see and feel my anger rather than hiding it, repressing it, or putting it on him. But then I went to fear because I knew that in the anger, there's no communication. Like when I was angry, I didn't want to go and be vulnerable with him. That was the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to go wring his neck. That's what anger is. I mean, can we be honest? So then looking at the fear, there was fear there, and I was shaking, very mildly, but shaking. So I said, I'm not afraid of anything. It's like, yes, I don't want a knockdown, drag out fight. I don't want that. Just letting that be there. That's the fear. Just letting myself be afraid of those words and that sensation. All happening in awareness. So at the whole time, the awareness is there. It's not like it's gone. It's there. We're looking. I'm looking, feeling. And then I went into, I can feel and express this fear to him. I can walk down there right now and just tell him I'm afraid. Not even go into the who's right or wrong. Just tell him honestly, I'm afraid. No, I can't. I can't do that. It's too scary to be that vulnerable. Let's say that came up. I don't remember what it was. It was a long time ago. It's too scary to be that vulnerable. Letting that be. And I can feel that fear. It's not hiding. I can see the words of it. Nothing is hiding. Letting that all be, and then that lets go. And then as it lets go, it's like my nervous system, because inquiry regulates the system. You know, people say, well, how do you regulate the system when you're doing inquiry? All this stuff can come up. Inquiry regulates the system because it makes things conscious and allows you to be with them from awareness. So carrying on with that, I'm not afraid. There you go. Some more stuff comes up. And then at the end, this is called the vulnerability inquiries, or that's what we're calling them, the vulnerability inquiries. But even then, so the fear and the anger starts to die down, the shaking is dying down, the nervous system is regulated because the programs are being seen through. That's why it's regulated. So then, again, just the last remnants of the anger and fear still don't want to be vulnerable, right? So the inquiry was, I could be vulnerable with him. And it's like, no, maybe I don't even remember what it was. No, I can't. as I stayed with that, what happened is my body got up and I walked downstairs and we had a discussion and it was honest and it was over because there was emotional honesty. And because of the work that he does, he was able to get vulnerable. There's such a lesson there in vulnerability and the free flow of communication, but that's not always available to us in those triggers. I think partly because we're not making our emotions conscious, we're not seeing everything that we're believing, right? So instead, we're coming from the belief. So at the first trigger from Chester, there must have been some program that I was coming from. I couldn't see the program. The anger, I was coming from the identification with the anger, not seeing it, not feeling it, not allowing it. So saying I'm not angry brought it to the surface so I could see it, allow it. I think if you don't do things like this, you can fester, right? Holding it all in, not able to communicate, be emotionally honest with the person, and just festering or going back to the person and fighting more. Again, because you're not dealing with your stuff. My relationship with Chester has become about vulnerability, and there's real free flow of communication now because of things like this. Whereas before, our patterns were not so skillful until I had a better sense of how to look at some of this. Because you have to remember that these triggers coming out of anger repression. So, in fact, they were new to me, fully allowing anger, bringing it to the surface like that. I needed inquiry. So here comes a question, shifting gears. Okay, there's some questions here. Let me at least try to answer these first, because they may pertain to what I was doing. Thanks for all the comments, guys. Adia said something about the issue of trying to fit spirituality into your life not being enough, and really what's needed is to give your life to it, right? That's what I'm saying. But then if you give your life to it, you see how it stops becoming a thing. Spiritual practice, just life, with more skill to see, right? I don't want a spiritual life. I don't think I live a spiritual life, Serena. I live a life. The spiritual life is a bit of a trap anyway for people because once you get into the spiritual life or the seeking game, it takes over your whole life. It can, right? But if you infuse practice into your life, it doesn't as much at all, really. God save me from becoming spiritual again. Hey, Nick, I don't know what you mean by ambition. Was that were you responding to something I said? So I don't know the context. Some tenacity is valuable here. Can you say more, Nick? Oh, you're talking to Serena. Okay, maybe I just don't know about this conversation. Chris, is there ever a time to just tell someone they're being a prick? I have before. Yeah, like sometimes. Yeah. But if this is someone that I care about, then that doesn't open up communication, name calling. But there again, it happens. Even with the name calling, though, it's like, yeah, it's coming from pain. Can we look at the pain? Or the name calling causes pain. Can we look at that? Because being interested in the pain, that's what we're looking at, and not suffering anymore over this. I like the question, though. Let me share a little bit about that, Chris. Calling somebody a prick or complaining or blaming. When I first got to Eckhart's teaching, I remember him saying complaining and blaming, or I guess he would say name calling, come from ego. So it's like, well, I don't want to do that. But for someone who was repressing anger all my life, it was quite liberating to be able to call someone names. It's quite liberating to complain every now and then, to blame because of the history of not doing that. But I don't rest there. I don't land there in like everybody's shitty and everybody's a prick because that's a painful place to land. But being able to is important. Being able to and not being shut down around that stuff has been really liberating for me. So, yes, it's strange to say, but I remember moments when I could call someone a name, even if I didn't do it to their face, but sometimes I did. Or complaining about someone, it's like, oh, you mean even this is okay? Because the repression and the Enlightenment teachings kind of told me that it's not okay. So that part of myself got shut off. Now, once I've opened that part of myself, I can acknowledge that, allow that, embody that, but also not land there. Not just become someone who just goes and calls people names because it's fairly unconscious. There's pain there. This brings me to the next one. Oh, well, here's the one I didn't go to. So somebody was talking to me about people come up with this a lot, like, are we trying to get things to go away? No. Let me say it this way. Of course we are. First of all, let me say that. Of course we are. If things didn't fall away, can you imagine a spiritual practice in which nothing ever fell away? So basically, you'd have the same consciousness you had 10 years ago with all of those triggers and traumas. There would be no change because nothing fell away. So think about it that way for a moment. Is that something you'd ever be interested in? A spiritual practice in which nothing actually fell away or dissolved. So, of course, things fall away. Of course they do. And it's okay that we want them to fall away. It's okay because that's part of being human. But if your practice can involve letting things be, so if you do a reverse inquiry, like if you feel not good enough, I'm perfect as I am, that inquiry is designed to provoke something up. There's an intention behind that to see something. But then once it's up, letting it be exactly as it is, not getting it to try to fall away, just letting it be and allowing fully, and then that's how it falls away. It occurs to me to say this also. The inability to hold paradox is what trips people up. So people get tripped up on, is there anyone here or any self here to do anything? Um, is there anywhere to go? And ultimately, no. There's just this presence and thoughts of a self or others come and go within this feelings, sensations. So we're never really going anywhere. There's no self to go anywhere. But that's only one side of the equation. There is a trajectory of transformation that happens. Things fall away, and that changes the way we experience life. But if you can't hold that paradox, your mind will try to land on one or the other. It'll say there's nowhere and nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to do it, just presence. And it won't be able to hold the paradox that actually there's an unfolding that happens. That happens too. Inability to hold paradox is the dualistic mind. So much can get cleared up in spirituality just by being able to hold paradox. Because then you're not fighting for any particular position around things. You're open to seeing things from different perspectives and they don't feel like they're at odds with one another. Completely different perspectives are not at odds with each other, strangely. Here's another question. Someone asked me about the other symptoms of my spinal stenosis. Did I have any other symptoms? Yeah, I had shaking and tremors, and every now and then they'll come back. You see my hand sometimes shaking. It's doing it right there. Um, so that's not always there, but it's there a little bit this morning. What's interesting about that is it seems to be a byproduct of the nervous system that changes in it. So right there, it's calm. But there's something to say about that. Like once the shaking, I started to notice it. If I look at my hand or I contemplate that it's going to shake, then it will shake more often. But if I simply am present to the hand without the idea that it's going to shake, it doesn't shake as much. So a lot of this is like what you believe. But yeah, there are other symptoms to that. I don't even know if I can talk about this one. I don't know if I can articulate it. I'm not even going to go into that. Sorry, guys. Well, the point was, is there anybody that's literally nothing? Someone asked me that. Is it possible to be nothing? Well, you could say that we're all nothing at the core. That's what we are, but each of us has our own individual expression. So everybody has a perspective, a flavor. As soon as you open your mouth or you express yourself or dress a certain way, you're expressing yourself. Everybody has an expression. So nobody just sits here without viewpoint or perspective constantly. You think of Eckhart sitting on the park bench. He had a period of time where just nothing was happening. But then he wrote books. He had a lot to say. I don't know where that goes, but there it is. Really switching gears here. Oh, no, let's talk about this one. So, PTSD, when you're triggered around something, you may not recognize it as trauma from the past until you go into inquiry, and then you recognize it's connected to dad or something, being bullied or something. So, the new trigger that's like the old one, PTSD symptoms can get reinforced when you don't acknowledge and feel everything. And sometimes people can't because it doesn't feel safe. So they just try to regulate themselves in a certain way, distract themselves, something. But if you can be skillful with inquiry, you can start to shed the PTSD symptoms. Think about it this way. I'll go back to my husband since it's something I can talk about easily. Let's say there's PTSD here already from being bullied, and there was PTSD symptoms, meaning around energy of people that are bullying, those symptoms might occur. Actually, they're not there, but they have been from time to time throughout my life. What does that mean? It means in the face of someone who I perceive as bullying me, some of the PTSD could come up, like the need to avoid the person, shaking, feeling uncomfortable around the person, scared, anxious. So when I meet someone like this, the past is infused in that. So the trauma, the original trauma is there and active in this current trigger. But if I'm not inquiring after it to sort of clear the psychic and emotional energy, it's like that event reinforces the PTSD. Because it's like, oh, I met another bully, and it reinforced that bullies are scary. And so I'm scared, and here come the PTSD symptoms. And in a subtle way, they get reinforced every time you don't clear that, because it's like the consciousness learns. it learns that in the face of a bully, you respond this way, and it keeps responding that way. As I was talking about earlier, if in the midst of some sort of trigger, if you can make it all conscious, feel it all, that regulates the system, but it also deconstructs the programs of the trauma so that you're chipping away at it, you're seeing through it instead of reinforcing it. So, an unskillful way to go through a trigger would just be to be triggered and then either not look at it or just sit on a meditation mat hoping it all comes up or something. But if you actively bring it up in a safe and gentle way, like the way that I was saying, like, I'm not angry. Yes, I am. Seeing it all, feeling it all, in awareness. There, the emotions aren't repressed, they're not resisted, they're allowed. So that stress is not being created in the system. Whereas before, when I was a kid, in the face of a bully, I didn't process my anger. I didn't know how. So that anger creates stress in the body, contraction. See, with this new opportunity, I can start to unravel that. But it wouldn't be skillful to avoid that because it reinforces it. But instead of avoiding it, again, there's several ways into inquiry, but one of them is acknowledging exactly what you're feeling and feeling it, making it conscious so that it doesn't reinforce the pattern. And that's what I was doing with I'm not angry. Yes, I am. Seeing it all. And then I was going into anger repression, like I can feel and express anger. No, I can't. Whatever. Same with fear. So, I talked about how that opens up communication. When we get to the place of vulnerability and openness and instead of defense and attack. But there's another thing that happens is that it clears up the psychic it clears up that some of the effects that surround earlier PTSD, not reinforcing it, making everything conscious, feeling it and letting it dissolve. Then that new trigger again doesn't reinforce it. So, and the next time I meet someone like a bully, there's more clarity there. I've become conscious of it all, or I've let things fall away. So maybe this next time there's not much of a trigger because or somewhere down the road, this trauma is not, this thing is not reappearing for me because I'm cleaning it up each time it happens. I'm not just going asleep in it again. Think about that's what we did when we were kids. It's like we went to sleep around this as a way to protect ourselves. So we didn't know how or couldn't process the anger, the fear, the stories, the programs. So in shutting down, they just get imprinted into our body and our mind so that when we meet this trigger later, if we do the same thing where we fall asleep to it, it reinforces it. But these new triggers are opportunities to wake up in the midst of it. Every single trigger is like that, an opportunity. So there's a lot of people, in the business of regulating their nervous system. So instead of deconstructing this trauma as it appears with new triggers, maybe they don't know how or whatever else, but maybe you've learned just to breathing or resourcing in a certain way. You might want to read up on resourcing. And that just takes the edge off the trigger, makes you feel a little bit calmer. That's fine to regulate your system, but again, that can be somewhat going asleep around it. Because even though it calms the system, it doesn't make all the programs conscious. And there's no dissolution or falling away of those programs once they're conscious or of those feelings. So you can get in the habit of like having to regulate your system over and over and over again in the face of a bully, not getting to the root of the matter, not getting to what you believe. And so that lack of skill actually shows up as more triggers in which you have to regulate your system every time. But as you deconstruct it, the trigger gets less and less. So that after a while, you don't even find that response there to a bully. You might find some other response or maybe no response. So nervous system regulation is great to regulate the nervous system. It is not great as a way to deal with, usually to deal with PTSD at its root. Something different has to happen, like somatic experiencing, some trauma, truly trauma based approach, like KI. Not trauma based, but, and more than trauma informed, like skillful around trauma, is what people need to let go, not just regulate. This will be hard to articulate. Another question came in around, Scott, we're working on repression of anger, which implies maybe we can then speak anger more, or we're talking about new model of recovery where maybe the focus is on the drivers, on the trauma and the stuff driving the addiction. But the question, I forgot exactly the wording of it. This was a conversation. But the question was something like, okay, so do we express anger? Do we actually use, if we do inquiry and let's say the compulsion frees itself, there's very little compulsion, do we still use, or if the anger doesn't feel repressed, do we actually express it? And all I can say is, just because you're clear of something doesn't mean you do it. Here's what I mean. Heroin. Okay, so heroin apparently feels really good, like any opiate in the body. If I do inquiry where I let go of anything around heroin or opiates, like there's just no compulsion there. So I feel like if I did it, I wouldn't be addicted or something, whatever. I may still choose not to do it because then now I have the freedom. This work gives us the freedom to choose instead of feeling compulsive about something. But in that freedom, there may be a wise reason not to use it, even if you feel like you can. Alcohol, for example, you may feel free around it, and that freedom may make you want to have a drink, which is fine. But you also may make a decision not to because there's an intelligence here where you know that you don't want that in your life. All we're doing here is creating this opening. We're not creating, but recognizing that everything is allowed, making everything conscious, watching everything fall away. That's what we're doing. That's all that we're doing. We're not, giving you advice about whether to get angry or use, but what I'm saying is there may be good, intelligent reasons not to use something or not to get angry, not to go off on someone, even if you're no longer repressed. And in that case, it's not always repression, it's like wisdom. So just because I can yell at a big, tall guy in a convenience store, just because I don't feel like I have to hold that back, doesn't mean that I go and do that. And that's just out of wisdom. It may not even be out of fear. It just means like don't think I want that in my life. I don't know how that helps you, but I'm just saying there have definitely been times where I've felt like I could do heroin or drink when I chose not to because I had the freedom of that choice. I wasn't being driven anymore, but that doesn't mean that I do it. See if there's anything else here. I'm looking for any real trigger for me right now so I can do another demo of KI for you. When I say real trigger, like something that has some energy with it. pretty quiet. Let me just sit for a second and see if there's anything here. I hate that it's this quiet because I want to show it to you without doing another imaginary one. I don't hate that it's quiet. That's not true. It's very nice. Yeah, there is one thing that still has some juice on it, and it has to do with trusting people, and it has to do with a friend that I had in sixth grade. We were very close up until sixth grade, and that's because the bully, who was another friend of mine, turned this friend. I'm going to call this friend Joe. That's not his real name. Joe and I were very close, best friends, lived right next door to each other, spent practically every day together. The bully, we'll just call him Bully, got Joe and my other friends to turn against me. So here are my best friends. Can't trust them anymore. A lot of that is cleared up, but there's one particular relationship with Joe where there's some there still, and I can use that and show you. Now, let me back up here because I may actually encounter this in my present life. So, to be awake in my relationships, I might find that there's some issue of trust somewhere, and that might be a way into that. But there's nothing currently going on that I can see. All I see is Joe. This image of Joe, like being my best friend that I loved hanging around. He was at my house all the time. He thought my parents were his parents. So there's this picture of him, and it's showing up. And that's often what happens first is like just some image or memory, and then not being able to see what it's about, even if I feel something. So I look at that image of Joe. What does that image of Joe mean about me? Obviously, can't trust him. He turned against me. There's no energy on it, but it's a thought. Just letting it be there. Not trying to get rid of it. Just awake to it now. I don't trust him. Just the words. And I'm just resting as that open, awake, boundaryless presence. Just presence. And then this one thought in there. And now it's starting to dissolve. So I just rest, and as the last remnants of it dissolve, just recognizing the space that remains. Stopping for a moment, pure presence, experiencing life without that thought for a moment. But then not getting lulled into some bypass here. So, how this happens here, the bypassing is okay, that thought fell away. I'm fine now. But the way that these programs work, they're deeply connected somehow in the body. That's why they're reappearing. So I'm going to bring the picture of Joe back up, and now I'm going to feel into where am I feeling that in the body. It's got to be something. And strangely, it is connected to the spine. There's just a small sensation back there. And I can feel that in awareness now. And I can see the image of Joe is connected to that. But what I know about consciousness is there are more words there, keeping all that in place. So I'm going to ask again, what does the image of Joe mean? That I can't trust my best friend. Okay, so I'm going to reverse that. I could trust Joe completely. And then no, he turned against me. That's what you're going to see is repetition. Repetition of certain programs meet each one every time. So those words are met. Even though I've already seen them, it doesn't matter. They're Velcro to a sensation That's why they're persistent. So staying with it again. And already the thought is gone. So just resting there without the thought. And that already shifts that sensation a little bit. So you notice the sensation shifted without ever going down into it. Just seeing the thought that's connected to it. So now the image of Joe is really vague. It's like, it's almost like, why even bother? But in order to avoid bypass, you have to be careful with that because, again, if a thought or thoughts are deeply rooted into some sensation, it's still there. So it's like you've just picked the flower out of the garden, but the root of it, or the weed, the root of it is still firmly planted in the ground. So I'm going to come down into the sensation in the spine that's like the ground, feeling into that, letting that be as it is first. And this, to describe this sensation, it's not even anywhere close to pain. So, I was in excruciating pain once. This is just like sensation, light, barely feel it, actually. So, even why bother? Except that what I've learned is these sensations persist partly because there's something still believed. And if there's nothing believed in, then maybe it is a physical sensation. But if there's something connected to it, it's partly psychological and emotional. So discernment is important here at this level. So there's the sensation. What does it mean about me? Is just a question, an open-ended question to see what program might still be there. So what does this sensation mean about me? And I just rest and listen within and as the quietness. And then what comes up is it's not safe to trust people closest to you. Okay, there it is. It's not safe to trust the people closest to me. So there I thought it was just a sensation, right? And if you're not careful, you'll think it's a physical sensation that has nothing connected to it. But by asking what it means about me, boom, there it is. Now I can see it. It's not safe to trust the people closest to me, and I just let that be. Not trying to fix it, not trying to change it. There it is. But staying awake to it. And then it falls away. Strangely, that sensation shifts even more. Now I can't feel it. It's not even there. You see what I mean by being thorough and not bypassing and not taking those moments where you just feel better to be the end of it because of how it's deeply rooted in the body. And without coming down into the body and asking certain questions that would elucidate these programs, then you get stuck with a chronic pain or a sensation that just never goes. And that goes to this whole thing, do we want things to fall away? Of course we do. But in non-duality, when we talk about that, what we're saying is that the falling away comes from being with and allowing things as they are. But of course we want a falling away of that. And that's what happens. If something is connected to what I believe, then it isn't really me. It's something that I believe. And so if there's pain created in the body because of something that I believe, it's okay to be interested in the falling away of that. Because it's not real, it's not me. It's something old that I'm just hanging on to. The issue is you don't want to get in this business of trying to get things to fall away. Just do inquiry from awareness. Let awareness be your foundation, always. It's always coming from awareness. And then just being curious and allowing things from here. And then things fall away. But you don't have to have the story of trying to get to some place of things falling away. It's just that's what happens here as you look from here. Somebody asked me, Scott, how do you know so much about so many different things? Meditation, mindfulness, non duality, inquiry, therapy. What's your background? I'm new to the work and just asking. It's my background is almost 15 years of individual one-on-one sessions with people all over the world. Richer experience than anything you can get from a university because I've been living immersed in consciousness with people. Like I spend almost every waking day sitting with people and looking to see what they believe, why they believe it, and how they suffer over it. And I get to sit with people all day who mistake who they are for what's arising. And I'm in the business of just showing them that that's not really what they are and letting them be with it. So when you spend that much time with people, you do get insight. It's like I don't want to keep all that to myself. I want to share because I think it's a unique experience to have to be blessed to sit with people and where they bare their soul and they're vulnerable and open. And then just being in the experience of that with them, it shows you so much about your own experience and then exploring my own experience. That's where my background is. I went to, I studied to be an addiction specialist. I became an addiction specialist. That was fairly useless, to be honest with you. Yeah, I don't think you can go to college to learn what I'm talking about. It comes from the insight realized from doing the work and watching other people do the work. That's where all of it comes from. Just looking to see if there's anything else here. Here's something. A couple of things, actually. Um, if some of you, one gentleman was talking about doing, I talk about core concepts. So certain phrases or words are very persistent. You know, like think of one that's persistent for many people is like, I'm unsafe. If that's something you recognize as persistent, I'm not safe, I'm unsafe. When you start feeling into physical pain, body contractions, that's when you really encounter these persistent words. Let me give you the example of get away. So I told you in previous videos, during the time of chronic pain, one particular image was me in the school library in fourth grade. There I am just sort of like looking at books, but I'm really hiding from the bullies. They're out in the hallway. And that moment in time was so important that a snapshot was taken and somehow imprinted in my system. And then that snapshot, for some reason, was contributing to the pain. The programs related to that were contributing to the increase in pain, physical pain. So, when that came through, so I looked at the image of me in the library and I asked, what does that mean about me? And what came up is get away. And I didn't know whether it meant I need to get away, like from the bullies, or they need to get away. But it was very persistent. Get away, get away. And it seemed to be connected right with the sensation. So it's almost like the sensation was saying, get away, get away. If you haven't done deep somatic work, you may not even have seen this yet. But when you go deep into the body, you see the persistence of certain things. So this was there. And when it would come up, the thought felt very thick, like because it was almost synonymous with the sensation. So what I was doing, I was just tapping through. So I saw the words get away. And I needed help, frankly, because it's an old trauma. This is what I'm saying, like your non-dual resume doesn't help you at this level. Nothing helps other than just being with experience. So just being with the thought, get away persistently. And I noticed how persistent it was, I just rest with it. And it took a while, but it would fall away. And it just kept coming back and back. So I had no problem just tapping on the words when they came back. Get away. And then they would fall away quicker. I'd bring them back, tap. And I tapped through that concept many times, and that concept stopped appearing. Don't be afraid to do things like that on persistent concepts. You don't have to witness everything, especially if it's like sludge. Like, I'm not safe. I'm just stuck. Why? You can do that, but why? What's the principle? Because you're really identified in that moment. You know that. You know that the I'm unsafe feels true. It feels like you. And you're just bringing it back up to be identified every time. Especially if nothing is happening from that. Like there's no seeing through it. There's no seeing other than just being identified. Tap or use the tapping on the head. Don't be afraid to do that on those core persistent things because they give relief to the body. And although there be people who would say, we're not trying to get things to go away. Well, yes, we are. When you have chronic pain, you definitely want it to go away. But again, doing it from awareness, like just being curious and letting things be there, the tapping just helps with that. It helps move things along a little bit. And although that may not seem important to you now, if you're in excruciating physical pain, it will be really important to understand that that's available to you. Another question around that was from someone was discovering these persistent programs and then wondering, are they actually relevant? So in other words, you may see programs that aren't relevant to your current life. The one that I can relate to is, well, no, I can't actually, because it was relevant. If you can find something that comes up in inquiry, but you can't see whether it's relevant, you can trust your body, first of all. So if there's a sensation strongly with it, trust that you believe that this is a program that you believe. Trust your body. It's your best friend when it comes to inquiry. So it's the difference between words that are strongly velcroed or words that are just light and airy. And the light and airy ones are fairly irrelevant. But the ones that are strongly velcroed, here's the thing. Look, here's where I discovered this is I have to hide. So I have to hide is a program that definitely from childhood, bullying, hide from the bullies, hide, 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 hide. And then I hid for 20 years or more. But as I got older, the hiding stopped in my life, mostly. Like it was pretty much gone in most areas of my life. But then in the chronic pain, it came back. I have to hide, I have to hide. And I wondered, is it relevant? Because I don't see hiding. But then I looked more closely, and I saw, oh, yes, I am hiding. I'm not always sharing all my emotions or repressing some of them. Certain addictions, I'm not telling everyone everything. So I saw the pattern acting out in my life, and I saw the relevance then. So if you see a program coming up, if you don't know whether it's relevant, look in your life. Is that pattern showing up anywhere, even in small and nuanced ways? Because if it is, that shows you the relevance of it. But you don't even need to see it in your life. It could just be old, in which case maybe you, at this stage in your life, you don't act that way or feel that way with people. But the body remembers that program from childhood and it creates pain or contraction. So you can trust the body even if you don't see the pattern in your life now. But most of it, you probably will see the pattern actually. And I think this might be my last topic here. We'll see. Someone mentioned, like, do we even need, is no self just another thought? And you hear that talked about in some really advanced teachings, like self and no self, they're just viewpoints that come across. And so people will say things like, no self is also just a concept, and that's true. But here's the thing, discover the realization that these things are pointing to before you dismiss them as just another concept. So no self is pointing to an actual realization, a seeing. And if you throw that concept out too early, you might not realize what it's pointing to. And that's true. I see people doing that now. It's like they're deconstructing language even before the language can point them to the realization. And that's one example right there. So I've heard someone saying, well, no self is just another concept. True. But then I asked them, what's your experience of yourself? And they said, well, I still experience that separate self. And I thought, well, then don't throw out that quite yet. There's maybe something to be seen there before you just chuck it to the side and say, it's just a concept. Let me just see if there are any longer questions here in the email. Let me see, this may be one of them. No. Let's see what you guys are saying. I have a few minutes before my sessions. I think I need my glasses. So Nick's back. I have a deficiency story that says something like, I never do anything thoroughly. There you go. Nick is talking about like a self-support obstacle, like something that stops him from looking at an obstacle. So Nick, did you look at that? And I think you figure out where to go there. So I can always be consistently thorough. I'm always consistently thorough. Should bring it up. I wonder, so, okay, Carolyn, so I wonder how I managed the work during the chronic pain. So this is maybe something that I share here. Because again, I'm not doing a lot of that experiential work publicly, but I'll do it. I'm doing it now as a way to invite you guys to this new platform so we can do more of it. Oh gosh, that's like, there's a whole lot to say there, so I'm going to make it quicker. But first 2 years of the pain, the skill wasn't there. Awareness was. That was my experience, but the skill to deal with the real issues really wasn't there, or there was a resistance. So the first thing I had to do was look at this story that this is physical, not emotional. It's like Nick. Nick has this block where he can't do things consistently or thoroughly, so that stops him from effectively looking. That was stopping me, the belief that this is physical, not emotional. So I sat around for a couple of weeks and just did that. So this pain is emotional, not physical. No, it's not. It's physical. MRI proves it. Doctors say it. There's a diagnosis. Just witnessing all of that, letting it all be. It goes quiet and repeat again. This is emotional, not physical. And then here's the belief again. So I stayed in that, and eventually it's like, oh no, yeah, this isn't physical. It was just a belief. I didn't know, but it was a belief that I knew what it was. So then I was open to the exploration. Before that, I wasn't really open. And from there, I began to understand first, like by reading literature, John Sarno's books, and science, some science, that chronic pain can be repression, anger and fear repression mainly. So I sat there, well, that's not going to show up. Like, of course I repress anger, but how the hell do I get to that? And I just sat with the pain, felt into it. And for a long time, weeks, I was in the inquiry. I can feel and express anger to Chester or to Dad or to the bullies. No, 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 no. Hundreds and hundreds of variations of the thought no. I just stayed with it. Now, other stories came up too. Like I said, I have to hide, get away. Those things were mingled in. So I did KI on those, like I just explained. But with the repression, I stayed with it. So I just stayed with that inquiry. I can feel and express anger. No. Kept watching, kept watching, kept watching. Each day when I would do that, what I noticed is it helped the pain, just relieve the pain for that day. I didn't take it all away, but it would just bring it down to a much more functional level. Because what I recognize is the pain signal for me was an indication that of repression and trauma. It stopped indicating go to the doctor, although I continue to go to the doctor. That's where pain signals tend to tell people to do is like, go take something, go to a doctor. I did that because I didn't want to stop doing that. But I listened to the pain signal and I started to notice it's actually telling me there's something here that I'm not seeing. So the pain signal became my best friend. And when it would flare up, now the flare up, what that felt like on the worst cases was like debilitating. Can't move, can't talk, can't do anything. So incredibly debilitating. But it wasn't always at that level. It would just, this pain signal would amp up. It'd be like a nerve pain radiating through my whole body. That eventually started to tell me to go into inquiry. It was a signal. So what I would do is I would fish around for any stressor, of course. Like if something currently was stressing me out, I would look at that, current stressors. But then it would always come back to anger repression or fear repression work. So coming back to putting the people up and repeating. And once I would do that, like I can feel and express anger. No, they'll attack you. I would just stay with that. And again, when a thought would fall away completely, I could feel the sensation shifting. And I just rest there when the thought fell away. It's like a little bit of relief. And that gave me confidence that I'm on the right track here. Like this is actually repression. So continuing and continue it. And every day it would level the pain off to make it functional. But then I realized over time there was a trajectory happening. Like the pain was actually diminishing. The obstruction itself was diminishing. And I ventured off into like love repression. There was some of that from being bullied. Like I have to repress love because if you love the people closest to you, they're going to hurt you. They're going to make fun of you. So I went into that and a few other side stories. But essentially it came down to one particular leftover deficiency story, which I have to hide, coming from hiding emotions, hiding from bullies. So that plus a few trauma commands like the get away from the bullies, that high school or grade school photo library. So you can see how there were several things operating, but I kept coming back relentlessly to the repression inquiry, love repression, fear repression, anger repression, even joy repression. And I kept in all of those inquiries until I got a yes on all of those. Like, yes, I can experience joy, express joy. Yes, I can experience anger. Yes, I can be aggressive if I need to be. I can be aggressive in speech and in action. Yes. And by that time, the pain signal was gone, just completely gone. Now, after that, it wasn't like that's just the pain signal gone and the obstruction in the spine shrinking or dissolving. But then there was still just a little pinch in my spine, which felt physical, and I had to go back into some of these inquiries on that level to feel release around that. And a lot of people might stop there because they might think, well, I got rid of the pain signal, but the pinch is physical because the MRI shows that your vertebrae is actually pinching to the spinal cord. But knowing I don't know exactly what I've discovered here other than it's words and pictures all the way through, down to even the most, unless the sensation is truly physical, words and pictures involved in that all the way through. So when I got to the pinch, still words and pictures. That's in fact where I went deeper into aggression inquiry. That must have been a deeper repression, like, I don't know how to say that, but connected to the core layer of that. And doing that helped release the pinch. Now there's still a pinch in there, but it's like nothing, nothing. Where it was very tight, very throttling, and emanating a pain signal. So there it is. There's the story. Fast forward version of it. I'll just leave you with a few notes. I dealt with a lot of shit during that repression work. So rage came up, anger, fear, and I know now that that's going to come up for other people, and it has, including a lot of resistance is coming up for people when they do this deeper work because it sort of messes with your personality, with who you think you are in a very deep way. So there's resistance. This is why we're moving to the platform. Is a real big reason why, is because having gone through this, if you all pick this up, it's incredibly liberating. Absolutely wouldn't change it for the world. All of that wouldn't change any of that for the world because the pain is gone. But stuff comes up, resistance, anger, whatever else, and people do need support during that. So that platform is going to be about support and skill development. Because many of you are going through this, and even people have shared, even as they inquire, that a bunch of stuff is conscious now. So think about it. If you're doing inquiry on deficiency story and now it's conscious everywhere, you see it everywhere. Imagine that anger repression or anger starts coming up, or you see the repression everywhere. It is helpful to be around people who've traversed that, who can guide you into inquiry so that you don't get lost, you don't get stuck. That's what the platform is about. Deep somatic work. Let's see what else is here. Just a few minutes left. It seems like you didn't have an inhibitive deficiency story to obstruct your consistent inquiry. I did on the it's physical and not emotional, but I didn't have the story that I can't do it right or that my suffering won't go away. A little bit of that was there, like this pain will never go away, but I looked at that. So there was no inhibitive deficiency story on actually doing the inquiry, except this is physical and not emotional, and that definitely inhibited all inquiry. So, yes, Nick, the point is you want to start with the inhibiting deficiency story, and you already know that. So there you go, Carolyn. I just explained it, how I managed to work during my years of pain. Sacha, I don't think it's too general to say everyone gets chronic pain from unresolved trauma and repression. But here's what I do notice. Even if you don't develop chronic pain, people have body contraction. So that stomach that's persistently contracted, the heart that feels closed, the throat, that's the same thing, trauma and repression. It just isn't showing up as a contraction, or it's not showing up as chronic pain. So all of my contractions were dissolved through the process of embodiment. no head contraction, no throat, no heart, no stomach, no pelvic area, anal, nothing there. So the repression just went to another area. It went to the area that was vulnerable in my spine, apparently, and attached to that. So for other people, it might not attach to that. It just might be in the stomach as a contraction, or maybe even according to science, it may be showing up as an illness or a mental health issue. Not always chronic pain, but for some of us, it comes as chronic pain. So if you have chronic pain, knowing what I know now, I'd be looking at this very closely before you decide that it's physical and start treating it that way. Treat it, go to the doctor. I used to tell everybody, continue to go to the doctor because you never know if a pain signal is actually alerting you to something that needs medical treatment. But if you have chronic pain, instead of saying everybody with trauma or repression ends up in chronic pain, don't think of it that way. Think of if there's chronic pain, look into repression and trauma because I don't think everybody experiences chronic pain. Was it a coincidence that Jeff Foster had Lyme disease? I can't comment on that. I don't know his subjective interior experience. I can only share because I've not been able to talk to Jeff about his journey through that. So I don't want to guess. But what we know about all diseases, even if they're not created by repression or trauma, even if that's not a major contributing factor, even the old science says that stress makes diseases worse. So I'm sure he noticed that during more stressful times, the symptoms were worse. And that's a matter of processing that stress, I would imagine. I would love to have a conversation with Jeff Sacha around this, a really open, honest, intimate conversation about what happened with him. How did I go to my job with all the pain and having to focus on job rather than inquiry? It was not easy. And that's the reason, without inquiry and having to focus on job rather than inquiry. Ah, yes. Well, medication, to be quite honest with you. So inquiry would level it off, but I would still have the pain. So there are times I had to medicate that just to survive the day. So I did that through harm reduction, like choosing the least harmful ways of medicating. So instead of painkillers, which are my drug of choice, went eventually to ketamine, stayed on that for a while, and other things that just helped with the pain while I was healing it, while it was being healed. So that was just relief or managing the pain during the process. And then there came a time when I didn't have to take the ketamine anymore. The inquiry had worked to deconstruct the programs under it, so the pain signal was gone. Okay, I'm tired of listening to myself talk. See you guys.